Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Welcome aboard to this week's Between the Lines podcast. Today, I am joined by Allison Moore-Farrell. Allison is a transportation planner with the City of Boulder who supports the Transportation Demand Management, or TDM program, and is responsible for working with employers, employees, and residents to reduce single-occupant vehicle travel, vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and transportation-related emissions. Prior to the City of Boulder, she worked in transportation consulting, helping communities improve their transportation systems. So she knows a lot about, supporting people through the whole process of figuring out how to get to, wherever they're going. And today we're talking about a specific, important piece to that puzzle, which is public transit, and specifically group transit passes, and why group transit passes will help save the planet. Allison, thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. Great to be here.
And I think it'd be good to start with just kind of defining this. What is a group transit pass? What does that mean when I say that term that I may or may not have just invented?
No, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of, various terms around that. So I think it's good you defined it here. And essentially a group transit pass is typically set up by an employer in a metropolitan region that has a transit agency. And it's provided to employees. And they provide it for a variety of reasons. They provide it as a commute benefit to reduce single occupancy vehicles and greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce parking demand if they're in a dense downtown area. So there's a variety of reasons that employers will typically provide group transit passes. And I say typically employers because that is the most common form. There are other forms which we'll touch base on later, but for most transit agencies, that's the form that people are most familiar with. So it's really a transit access for employees. And oftentimes they're yearly passes. There's other forms as well, but we'll be touching base primarily on yearly passes here.
Cool. So these are so it's not, a single ticket to get on a single bus or train trip. It's not even a single person's year-long pass, but like a year-long pass or something for a whole group of people.
Correct. And I should also note that, in the past, it's typically been a physical card that, that employees will show. But a lot of agencies now are providing this as a digital option through an app. Cool. So that's kind of an exciting new option that a lot of agencies are looking at.
Great. 21st century. I like it. So let's dive a little bit into kind of your own transit pass system in Boulder. Can you tell me a little bit more about, it's called the Eco Pass there. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Eco Pass with RTD and maybe RTD as well? What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Boulder is part of the Denver metropolitan region, and our transit agency is called RTD, the Regional Transportation District. And so we're all part of the Denver region. I believe there's 6 or 7 counties that are part of the RTD region. So we have access to, to Denver, to the Denver airport, to, South Denver, all around this area. So, and the Eco Passes are RTD's group transit pass that it's based on a yearly basis. So, and we have RTD has 2 different types of passes. They have a business Eco Pass and a neighborhood Eco Pass. They also I do have a third type called the University Eco Pass, which we're not digging into on this episode, but that's for universities in the region. But for business Eco Passes and neighborhood Eco Passes, those are great options for residents and employees within the region. So like I mentioned earlier, the business Eco Pass is provided by employers for their employees. And the neighborhood Eco Pass is oriented more towards multifamily housing, and it can also be used for single family housing development. So it's more neighborhood based, and typically people will participate in this if they're not eligible through their employer or through the university. So that's typically where we see a lot of that engagement and participation with the neighborhood EcoPass.
And that's interesting because a lot of listeners probably understand the idea of the kind of business transit pass, eco pass program in this case. But the neighborhood eco pass, I've never actually used, so it's maybe a little slightly different program. Can we get into a little bit more about kind of how do you join a neighborhood eco pass program? Like, what is this? Who is it for? And how it's actually used.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, and I should also mention that the Eco Pass, like I mentioned, it was a yearly pass and it's used for all forms of transit in the RTD region. So that's buses, light rail, and commuter rail. So, and it's an unlimited pass. You just have to go ahead and swipe that as you board the various forms of transit. So, very convenient on the user end. And in terms of the neighborhood Eco Pass, it's actually a really unique program, especially the way that it is set up. So there's a couple different ways that you can become part of a neighborhood EcoPass program. If you're part of a multifamily development, say an apartment or condo complex or something like that, then your property management can pay for that as a benefit for residents, which is a really great way to do it. Especially if you're near high frequency transit. That's a great benefit that property managers can provide. Here in Boulder, we actually have kind of a unique program we've set up for a lot of multifamily housing. When they are built, we actually require the developer to pay for 3 years of eco passes. So, and we set that aside in an escrow fund with the city so that it's a benefit for these residents for their first couple years. And if they choose to continue on, that's a great option. So again, with multifamily, it tends to be a little bit more straightforward in terms of collecting those funds to pay RTD for the eco passes. Another way that communities do it is through HOA fees, which again is kind of this program that's already set up, right? So it doesn't feel like this significant lift once a year to pay for a yearly pass. Another option, of course, is in single family housing developments. And you do pay once a year for this yearly neighborhood eco pass. That does require a little bit more effort because you do need a volunteer coordinator in that neighborhood to organize everyone, see who's interested, collect those funds, and then go ahead and distribute the eco passes. So, and kind of keep track of who's moving in, who's moving out, that sort of thing. So it does require a bit more effort from the volunteer perspective in single family housing developments, but it is still possible. And I should note that this is a program that anyone in the RTD region is eligible for. So whether you live in Denver or Aurora or Centennial or Boulder, you're eligible for this. There is a minimum commitment of 40 households. So you do have to confirm that you have enough people in your neighborhood interested. But everyone is eligible. It's most commonly found in Boulder because for a few reasons, we provide a city subsidy for neighborhoods. So we provide a financial subsidy for neighborhoods who are interested in this because we really try to encourage transit access to meet our city goals. And we provide programmatic support. So part of my role at the city is to help neighborhoods start their program and then continue their program. There's a lot of little questions here and there that's really needed to get these programs up and running. So I'm able to help people with that. and I also reach out to other communities in the region to kind of share what we're doing because I think there's a lot of potential, especially for neighborhoods that are around high frequency transit, especially our light rail and commuter lines, where you have a lot of people commuting in and out of of downtown Denver and kind of areas like that with a large employer base. So everyone is eligible for it, and I know there's some neighborhoods in Denver that are picking up with it, but Boulder has historically had the largest amount. We have about 50 neighborhoods in Boulder that participate in this, which covers over 8,000 households. So it
Wow.
covers a lot of people, which we're really proud of, that this effort is making an impact, and helping us meet our city goals. And then we can provide that information to RTD that they can share with other communities in the region.
And yeah, man, this is a really cool program because it kind of fills the gaps where employers, um, may or may not offer a business eco pass, but this can kind of fill that gap for everyone who doesn't get one. I like that idea. Another thing that comes to mind and that we were talking about before recording is that this also can be used by people who don't work, particularly maybe young people who are not yet at a university or working, and maybe kind of encourage transit use among youth. How do you see that? Like, is that a benefit? Is that something that's really happening there? Like, we're getting the youth out to take the bus to wherever they're going?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. For the non-driving population, we actually have, the Eco Pass is a terrific option. On one end of the spectrum, we have a lot of senior housing communities that are
Mm-hmm.
huge Eco Pass users. It's amazing. I mean, and they're very active, and so it's great to see that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, with our youth users, it's really great to instill this behavior of taking transit for everyday use, whether it's getting to school or going to the skate park or grabbing lunch with your friends, or just encouraging that everyday use, and getting in that lifelong habit of that, and then continuing that throughout your life. So what's great about the Eco Pass is it covers everyone in your household. So when you pay for that, it covers your kids as well. So you just provide them a card, and they can take that to get to school. And that's, again, we really want to be encouraging that for our youth to use this, and instill those lifelong transit habits, and understand that, and really normalize transit use, and make it fun and enjoyable. And, in Boulder, we have, a number of transit lines that we've named, instead of being numbers. So we have the skip, the hop, the jump, and the bound, and all of these. So it kind of makes it a little bit more fun for youth, I think, and really encourages that, and that behavior change. So it's yeah, getting youth on board is a really great way of really expanding that transit usage.
And I like the unintentional pun there, getting youth on board.
Oh yeah, I didn't.
But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It's a great idea. And yeah, we'll make public transit fun and
Yeah.
cool to do. So I think that's great. So we mentioned a couple of kind of the key groups here using the neighborhood eco pass, and obviously then the business eco pass, pretty self-explanatory. We're having I would guess generally the businesses that are offering these eco passes might be higher wage kind of work in general. Is that a good assumption?
I'd say that's a good assumption. I don't know off the top of my head. That's information that RTD would probably have, and could certainly provide. But I would say, kind of anecdotally, that's pretty accurate. And it's typically for full-time employees. So if you
Yeah.
are a part-time employee, or say a restaurant or retail worker outside of our general improvement districts, then it might not even apply to you in your employer's eyes. So yeah, I would say that's typically fairly accurate.
And so maybe this neighborhood eco pass could help once again fill in those gaps. But I wonder if what other kind of low income transit access pass options exist out there in Colorado or beyond that you've heard of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know in the RTD region, we have, in 2019, RTD introduced what's called the LIVE program, and it is our low income transit access program. So unfortunately, it hasn't had a huge participation rate, because from kind of anecdotally, it's there's some barriers to entry in terms of actually being able to sign up and be eligible for it. So I think there is some communication and outreach needed around that, because there's a lot of potential with the program. And I think there's just some kind of pieces like that need to be incorporated in order to have better participation with it, because it is a really good option, for low income individuals, and that's on an individual basis, which is nice, because it's maybe a little bit easier if it's only applicable for one person or so. And kind of to complement that, at the City of Boulder, we've been working on a couple pilot programs for low-income communities through RTD's mobile ticketing program. So also in 2019, RTD introduced mobile ticketing, which is exactly how it sounds. It's an app on your phone, and you can get a ticket and purchase a ticket through the app. So it allows us to be able to go through the back end and provide tickets for low-income community members. Again, not everybody is super tech savvy, so it might not be a great option for everyone. But we have found for some communities that is working, as an option, and that we're able to provide that for some of our neighborhoods. So we work with Boulder Housing Partners, who is one of our low-income housing developers in the city, to go ahead and provide outreach to communities for that. We're looking at trying to scale that up and seeing where that can lead. I think there needs to be some kind of back-end input on the app side that we're hoping for. But again, running these pilots really helps us provide that information from the user perspective. So there's a lot of potential, and I think really ease of access for low-income community members and low-income neighborhoods is really what's going to be key here, because like I mentioned before, with the neighborhood eco pass, if you're in a single family home neighborhood, it requires a lot of volunteer time, and a lot of our low-income neighborhoods don't have that that leisure time to volunteer and do that, right? So we really need to be able to kind of solve that problem of that additional time that it takes to become part of these programs. So we're working on some of those solutions, and then trying to scale them up so that we can provide transit access options for our low-income community members.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. It's transit's obviously a great option for, well, assuming that the access is there, it's a great option for a lot of folks, but cost can certainly be a barrier, and having to, form a group of 40 households or something to get a neighborhood eco pass might be hard. You might not be able to get something from a business eco pass. So having those options to, on your own, go out and kind of grab an annual pass for a discount, or that makes sense. I think it's a great idea. So we've talked, quite a bit about RTD in Boulder. I wonder if you know of what's going on in other jurisdictions. What are they doing with group transit passes? How is this looking elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm not familiar if there's any in other parts of Colorado, like Colorado Springs or Fort Collins, in terms of group transit passes. I know in the Aspen area, there's a lot of seasonal workers. So I do know they have some seasonal transit passes and group passes there. That's very specific to their needs, of course. In terms of group transit passes, most metropolitan regions that have a large transit system do have some sort of employer sponsored or similar group transit pass. And the only one, when I was doing research on this around 2 years ago to kind of do some revamping for our program, and the only major transit agency I found in the US that was doing community-based or neighborhood-based transit passes was King County Metro in Seattle. So they have a similar program. To my knowledge and from my research, their program is more for multifamily housing, which, as I explained easier, is a little bit more straightforward. So that entirely makes sense, and would be more straightforward to streamline and all. But it sounds like they have a pretty successful program, and multifamily tends to be near high frequency transit routes more than single family homes, especially in the way we're moving forward with developing our cities and looking at land use these days. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think as we're moving forward with a lot of cities recognizing that connection between transportation and land use, that maybe other jurisdictions can look at, multifamily housing as group transit passes and utilizing that option. I think that could be really key in moving forward as communities are, looking at ways to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and single occupancy vehicle use and all that sort of thing. So really incorporating that land use side into our transit access would be, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, a big topic. I mean, there's a lot there. That's
Yes.
5 episodes on its own. But I mean, yeah, if you're in King County Metro, Seattle area, you're in Denver RTD region, check out the neighborhood or kind of community eco pass programs. If you're a transit agency in another one, talk to RTD in King County. They seem to be doing something pretty cool here. So it'd be great to see this everywhere. Yeah, I really like that idea. But the business eco pass or the business kind of transit pass programs that exist out there, employer-based programs, those are great as well. So certainly good to take advantage.
Yeah.
So we've moved on to kind of our final question here that we ask everyone. This is the point of the podcast. Let's talk a little bit about the planet and how this is going to help. So can you tell me a little bit, why will group transit passes help save the planet?
I love this. Yeah, I love this question that you've been asking everyone, because there's so many angles to it, right? And there's so many facets to saving the planet through transportation planning, and that's one of the reasons I love working in this field. There's just so much potential, and I think we were all following recently the COP26 conference in Glasgow, and something that really jumped out at me was the almost universal chorus of mayors and policy experts expressing how key transit usage is in reducing carbonization in our metropolitan areas. So, and obviously infrastructure is a huge piece of that, right? Especially in the US, I think we have some catching up to do to our European counterparts. But providing access to that transit and making it affordable is also really key. And I think that's, especially in a lot of these large bills that are infrastructure focused, I think that's a piece that really gets kind of ignored and then skipped over, to be totally honest. And we really need those on the ground programs providing that access. A new transit line and a new light rail line can seem really sexy and all, but if no one's there accessing it and utilizing it, then what's the purpose? So I think providing that transit access can have a huge impact, and really having that focus, especially in metropolitan areas, and looking at programs like this that provide that ease of access for all residents and employees in a region. So, I love to talk to, when I go to conferences, pre-COVID, of course, I always loved talking with other jurisdictions about this and how it could apply, and sharing ideas. And so I'm always willing to share what's worked in Boulder, and I love hearing ideas of what's worked in other jurisdictions, so we can apply that potentially. So I think if we continue to kind of share those options and share those how we're going to do that, then I think there's a lot of potential there on how we're going to save the planet. And we've learned a lot of lessons over the past few decades here in our region, but we need to continue to be creative with our solutions and actions in order to save the planet. So, yeah.
I like it. I couldn't have said it better. Once conferences come back in 2022, we can have these conversations in person again. Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe next year there'll be an in-person one. I'm hoping.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's good to connect with people in person. Hopefully it happens.
Yeah. Hopefully soon.
Great. Well, this has been a really good conversation. Stick around because we have one final question for you. Okay. But for everyone listening or watching, thanks again for joining us. make sure you subscribe to our email list. And you can do that at betweenthelines.io. You can get information about each episode and kind of learn a little bit more about what we've been talking about. If you haven't yet checked out the video on YouTube, also at that website, betweenthelines.io, definitely do. You can see what we look like instead of just our voices. You can see the energy efficient lights turn off right as I am giving this outro here in my WeWork office. And really just connect a little bit more. But yeah, join again next week. We'll definitely want to have you in on the conversation and reach out if you have any questions. We're always happy to keep that conversation going. Allison, our final question for you. As our more loyal listeners know, we have a Spotify playlist, a music playlist for everyone's commutes, once they're happening or just while you're hanging out at the house. And we're populating that with guests' favorite songs. So what would you like to add?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So, I typically on my commute, I'll listen to, like a Maggie Rogers station. So something like Lights On is one of my favorites. And I was also sharing with Andy on cold days like today, it's about 35 degrees Fahrenheit where I am right now. And I love to listen to Jimmy Buffett on cold days because it just makes me feel warmer. So that's kind of my go-to in winter. But yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, so we'll throw on the Maggie Rogers song. Maybe we'll pick one or two Jimmy Buffett to throw in there as well. I mean, you can't have enough Jimmy Buffett. Shout out to all the parrot heads out there who are loyally listening. Well, Allison, thanks again for joining, and to everyone listening, thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Andy. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.